everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm the City Witch. Today's video I'm going to be doing a book review, and the book is called The Crooked Path, an introduction to traditional witchcraft, and this is what it looks like. So this book is by an author called Kelden. Hope I'm saying that right. I'm terrible with names. And I probably got this book now about 5 months ago, and I know it's been out a lot longer than that, but it came out on Amazon, went out of stock, and it was out of stock for such a long time, and then eventually I managed to find it from somewhere else, and then I had to wait a while for it to be delivered, so it was this whole thing, guys. And I finally got hold of the book, and I was actually at the time reading another book that I was sinking my teeth into, so it took me a little while to get to this book. And then when I read it and realised how many exercises were in it, I mean, my god guys, there's 47 exercises. That's a lot, and I kind of didn't want to just read it and breeze through it and then give you a half-assed review. I wanted to try these exercises for myself and implement some of the stuff that he talks about, so I can give you a more well-rounded review on the book. So I have tried many of the exercises. I don't think I did all 47, because there was a few in there that I was like, oh no, I've kind of done that before somewhere else. I know I kind of don't need to do that. But there was a number of exercises, spells and rituals I did try from the book with really good results, so we will talk about them. So as always, I will talk to you about the content of the book and tell you what's inside. I'll talk to you about the author's writing style and what I personally felt and thought of the book. And I will give you a score from 1 to 10 on how good I think the book is, and if it's good for a beginner practitioner, a medium practitioner, or an advanced practitioner. So let's dive in, shall we? So this book really isn't that old. It only came out in 2021. As I'm filming this, it is currently January 2022, so Happy New Year and Happy Christmas to you guys. And of course this book was so well sought after, so well anticipated, that it's no wonder it just went out of stock everywhere. And finally, when I got my hands on it, I kind of understood why. So the first thing I want to say is that the information in this book is very factual and very well laid out, very well organised in the book, makes perfect sense, it flows. The author was very good at writing. Like, I thirsted for more of his knowledge, his insight, his experience. I really enjoyed this book, and I really hope that he is planning to write more, because it was wonderful, very well presented. The information on traditional witchcraft was very enlightening, mind-blowing, I think, for some people, and the rituals and spells he gives are practical and easy to use. Now, if you're new to witchcraft and you are looking for books to get yourself started, this is going to be an absolutely amazing book for you guys, because it doesn't focus on Wicca at all. It actually distinctly says at the beginning of the book, this is not Wicca, this is traditional witchcraft. And a lot of the books out there are very Wiccan or very modern witchcraft instead of traditional old school witchcraft, which is what this one is. And it's very difficult to find resources and information on that. And because so many books out on the market, you know, largely from the 80s and 90s, are very Wiccan based, it's very difficult to find a book on just witchcraft or just paganism, or just one particular path under the spiritual umbrella of witchcraft. So this was very refreshing, very enlightening, and I think everyone had anticipated it for a long time and desired a book like this, and it did not disappoint at all. The stuff that he talks about was really interesting. So, you know, it covers subjects such as the breakdown of traditional witchcraft and Wicca and the differences between the two, so you thoroughly understand what you're reading and looking at and why it's different from Wicca. He talks a lot about the original history and birthplace of Wicca as well, and the same with traditional magic, and how the two kind of at the beginning were almost like one entity and then split off, and that was largely because of the main people that were still practitioners that saved and rescued knowledge on witchcraft and decided to start forging Wicca, or began that journey of creating what we now know to be Wicca. And some of those people on that path had very divulging ideas, which caused it to split and break away. So what we know to be traditional witchcraft now was obviously basically the birthplace of Wicca, because that's what Gerald Gardner did initially. And then he formulated his version, his coven, which followed set rules and was structured into a religious practice that we now know to be Wicca. So he talks about all of that in the book. It gives you all of the source of information where he got this from. He also challenges you a lot on some of the beliefs and thought processes of Wicca. So he talks about the rule of 3 as an example, and very clearly tells you that it's incorrect. that what was initially the rule of three has been watered down and transformed, and what it now is, or what it represents in modern witchcraft, is very incorrect to what it originally was and what it was meant to be. And he gives you all of the facts behind that, tells you where you can fact check him as well, and directing you historically to documents and diaries and information where this is contained, so you can read it for yourself. And I've already done my research on this, so I knew he was correct. So when I was reading that chapter, I was going, yes, yes, this is brilliant. Someone's put it to paper. Someone's finally said it. Somebody's come out and said it. It's wrong. It's being used incorrectly. And here's how you can prove it. And I was so happy that somebody had finally put it into a book. And since reading this book, there's been a couple others that have started to say it. There's been more blogs and documentaries on it. There's been a lot more YouTubers coming out and saying it as well. So it's becoming more mainstream knowledge now that the rule of three is very misused. So I really loved that that was in the book. And that's just one of the things he picks on and uses as an example. And again, he backs this up with all his facts and information. He doesn't just tell you and hope you believe him. He's going, this is where this comes from. This is the proof. This is where we've discovered this now. These are the people that originally invented the rule of three. And this is what it's meant to be. And this is what it is now. Here's the differences. He's giving you all of that. So that was great. There was also really good information about hedge crossing. Now, I don't particularly call it that. I've been doing dimensional astral travel now for a long time, and I learned it from various other techniques that I've done for many years. Now, obviously, traditional witchcraft, it's called hedge crossing, which means you're crossing from physical reality into spiritual realms of existence, so other realms, and travelling to them and exploring them, practicing magic, forging alliances with other beings, entities and creatures from those realms, such as the angelic realm, the dragon realm, the fairy realm, and so on and so forth. And there's many different realms that you can travel and cross to. So it gives you a section in this book that talks about that. And again, that's not a widely known subject. Most people don't incorporate into their craft or realise that was part of traditional witchcraft, because witches were like the bridge between the spiritual and the physical, kind of like the Avatar from, Avatar, where he's talking about being the spiritual bridge between the physical and the spiritual realms and bringing magic into the world. So this is the same for traditional witchcraft. They talk about bridging that gap, communing with spirits, working with other forces and entities. That was never considered to be dark magic. That was just part of magic and being a witch, working with other energies, spirits and forces out there, which is something that modern witchcraft, I think, shies away from. So it was very refreshing that that was in this book. The other subject, which I thoroughly enjoyed, which was in this book, was the section on familiars. So again, this is very incorrectly used in modern witchcraft. You will have hundreds of people straight away will go, oh, that's my familiar, and they'll point at their household pet. That's not a familiar. Now, while your furry companion, is probably your best friend and plays a very powerful role in your life and probably does help you in your spiritual path and your witchcraft, that doesn't mean it's a familiar. And he breaks that down. He talks about this a lot, how people don't understand the differences between what a familiar is and what it does, and how you obtain a real witch's familiar as opposed to your pet that helps you spiritually. And there are big differences, guys, and I loved how he broke that down. He's very respectful and careful about it as well. So he's not telling you, no, your dog is not your familiar, and he's not trying to be, nasty about it. He's kind of trying to say to you, traditionally, that's not a familiar. This is a familiar. A familiar is an entity, a completely bodiless being of energy that you call into your life or is gifted to you, and you form a contract with it like you would with a demon or an angel or another being that doesn't belong to you. So he talks about this in that chapter, and he gives you a full-on ritual for summoning or calling a spiritual familiar to you to become your witch's familiar. And he makes it very clear as well that in all the stories and all the research he's done, you don't pick your familiar. A familiar comes to you, either gifted to you by a deity, a higher force, or it's gifted to you by an older, more experienced practitioner. So witches would traditionally pass on their familiars and pass on that contract, so that familiar is taken care of. And the thought, and I thought it was made me very sad when I read this, but he talks about how if the witch fails to pass on the familiar before they die, that familiar sits around waiting, hoping another witch will take it in and protect it, because it's a contract of protection as well, and they don't want to be left out in the cold on their own, and they miss that bond like any pet would miss their owner if they lost it. And that made me kind of go, oh. So he, for that reason, developed a ritual spell that you can cast to call a familiar into your life, asking for any familiar that's looking for a witch and wants to formulate a bond to come to you, to answer the call and create a contract with you, so you have your very own witch's familiar. And he does make it clear that this isn't, you know, something that's guaranteed to work, because you might never ever get a witch's familiar, and he says not every witch is meant to have one. He also talks about there might not be any in your area that can answer the call, and he also makes it very clear that there might be some there, but they don't want to work with you. And this is a separate being, you can't force it. It's not like summoning a demon and making it an offering in exchange for a service. It's not the same. This has its own mind, its own energy, its own magic, its own powers and abilities. You can't control or manipulate it the same way you do other beings. It has to want to work with you, and it has to want to formulate a contract with you, and it has to agree to the terms and conditions of the contract it forms with you, just as you have to do the same for the contract it's giving you. So it's an agreement, a promise to each other, and the bond can be extremely powerful. I thought that was very interesting, and I did try that particular ritual, and I did not get a witch's familiar in this instance. I did, when I was doing it, have a vision of some. It was kind of like just that section, like just the eyes, and the eyes were like this really bright crystally blue, and there was definitely fur, and it was black, but that's as far as I got. And so I felt like my call was heard and then rejected, is how I felt about that. But I got something from it, and I kind of felt like, oh, there's definitely some familiars there. There's familiars in my area, because I felt it. And I did this with 2 other people, and one of them got a familiar from this. I don't think she'll mind me saying this to you, but at the time she was studying as a student, and she was saying how she was struggling to retain information in her mind, and the familiar that came through to her, and it made us laugh because we just had a conversation about it before we started the ritual over a cup of tea, catching up, you know, as you do. And her familiar, so she said what she needed. She wanted a familiar to help her, and she was very specific about what she needed in her request. I'm not going to go into detail there, guys, because obviously it's personal to her. And right after we did this and we burned our petitions to call out to a familiar, a few minutes later we were meditating to see if anything would come through, if we'd get any visions or omens or any guidance as to what or who our familiar could be. And then she started giggling, and she just turned around and said, it's a worm. It's a bookworm, and it's going to live in my brain. And we were all a bit like, what? But it made sense to what she'd said about needing to store information in her brain and struggling to, you know, retain that information when she was studying and things like that. This familiar, contractually, the home it chose was to live inside her brain. The food it wishes to be fed is knowledge. So all she has to do is read. You know, and she's fulfilling her contract, and that familiar will help her with knowledge and information and clarity and understanding and wisdom and personal growth and development. And obviously, as a familiar, any spells and rituals she wants to work on and work with that familiar, it's there to work with. So it was very, very interesting. It made us all giggle. It was exactly what she asked for, and the form it came in, it chose to take the form of a worm, literally a bookworm. That was wonderful, beautiful, and it showed it had a sense of humour, so she was over the moon and really happy about it. And we enjoyed the ritual, and we all felt things and got different visions and omens from it. It was very, very interesting, guys. So I would definitely say it works, that ritual. Worked extremely well for a friend of mine with the bookworm. So give it a go. So let's talk about what's contained in this book. So I've talked about a few of the things I've experienced, a few of the subjects that I've really enjoyed that I've read in this book. And I told you how much I enjoyed the author and stuff about the changing of the paths between traditional magic and Wicca. So let's talk about the actual content of the book. So the first thing is it gives you a list of exercises. So there's 47 exercises in this book. So I'm not surprised that the book starts with that. So if you want to find a particular exercise to go back to time and time again, there's an easy list on it that tells you the page it's on, so you can find it really easily. Then from the black book, so that is a list of things you can make, such as breads and incenses that are talked about throughout the various chapters. So again, that's listed and tells you what page that's on, so you can go back to that and make it because they're recipes. Then there's a foreword from Gemma Gary, and then the introduction to the book. Then the book's broken down into parts, and then within that is chapters. So part 1 is what is traditional witchcraft. So chapter 1, defining traditional witchcraft, and chapter 2, the historical development of traditional witchcraft. So here you see history in the making, kind of how traditional witchcraft was discovered, the people that kind of nurtured and grew traditional witchcraft and how it kind of divulged from Wicca, which is what I was saying before about how that's talked about, and then defining what traditional witchcraft actually is. So that was interesting as well. Again, it gives you a lot of resource material to check what he's saying as well. Part 2, working with magic. So chapter 3, magical basics. Chapter 4, the traditional witch's tools. Chapter 5, the rituals of traditional witchcraft. And chapter 6, spellcraft. So for a beginner practitioner, this book is good because it gives you all the basics there, and the basics of magic, the basics of how to create and design a spell for yourself and then cast it, how to design your own rituals and the rituals of traditional witchcraft, and then traditional witchcraft tools. Now in Wicca there is a lot of tools that they recommend to you. In this there's literally only a couple of them, and you can make them yourself, and it gives you examples on how to do that, making it very cheap and easy. And then part 3, working with the other world. So chapter 7, the witch father and the witch mother. So this is where he talks about the god and the goddess, but he doesn't call them a god and a goddess. He talks to them about being basically the essence of male, so masculinity, and the essence of the feminine, so feminine divine, within nature and all things, and talks about them originally being referred to as the witch father and the witch mother. He also gives you a lot of concepts in Christianity, how those concepts were stolen and misinterpreted and used. So obviously we know the horned god was turned into the devil. The horned god is what we know to be the witch father, and he talks about that. He talks about the progression and the changes throughout history of what we know to be the horned god. Then chapter 8 is ancestors, familiars and fetches, and then chapter 9 is into the other world. So again, not many books talk about working with ancestors, most focus on divine, so gods and goddesses, and it was really refreshing that there was a section on working with ancestors and connecting with them, and it gives you a spell for that. And then there is working with familiars and fetches. Now fetches are very rarely ever talked about, so again, really refreshing subject to see. And familiars, like I said, really interesting, gives you the whole history about it, talks about the differences between your pet helping you in magic and having an actual which is familiar, and then the ritual I mentioned where you can learn how to summon a familiar for yourself. And then part 4, working with the natural landscape. So chapter 10, engaging with the land. Chapter 11, plants, stones and animals. And chapter 12, seasons, weather and planets. So here he talks about incorporating those extra elements into your magic, so working with plants and herbs and flowers and so on, stones and animals. Engaging with the land was very interesting. This is something I've been doing now for the past 6 or 7 years. There was a book I read that talked about this, about how most of us focus on, yes, we want to incorporate herbs and oils and ingredients in our craft, but we often read a spell and go, oh, it calls for that ingredient isn't local to me, I'm going to have to order it online. That's kind of our go-to because we have the wonders of the internet and we can have things shipped out to us. However, he says, but we've lost the connection to the land we live on. And again, this is the same for another book I read, actually a few books since then I've read. They talk about how we don't work with what's available to us anymore, that we're always wanting stuff that's from other countries or stuff that other people use in their craft because it looks cool or awesome or very, very witchy. So it's more about the aesthetic than actually the connection to the plant or the thing you're working with. And I think it's a very interesting concept, and I believe this is in hoodoo as well, that there's a belief that you cannot work with everything just because it's available, because the spirit of that plant, the essence of it, might reject you or not want to work with you or do anything for you. So it's important to form bonds with the spirits and the energies you work with, and I've come to believe that to be true over the last sort of 7 years, because there are plants and ingredients I was using and spells would fail or not work, and by cutting those out and now formulating bonds with the certain plants and energies I work with, I can honestly say I've had far better results, especially because I've incorporated plants and stones and animals that live local to me. So in my garden, so I've only lived in this new house now for a year with my partner, naturally what grows here I've started using. So dandelions and daisies, moss from the garden, there is natural honeysuckle growing, there is a hawthorn bush, and there is ivy. I'm now really closely bonded to the spiritual essence of those particular plants and items that I use, because I've been working with them and building up the bonds, and they grow on this land, and I leave offerings to the spirits and I thank them on a regular basis. And I've got into this routine now, weekly leaving offerings and and thanking these spirits and forces, and because of that they're now working for me a lot more. I'm a lot more prosperous, there's positive energies and forces, I'm meeting all the right people. It's like these things are naturally flowing to me. So all of these things came in through working with the spirits of land, through connecting those to the deities that I work with, and with leaving offerings and respecting the land. So that chapter was gold, I thought, and I thought it was brilliant, and I really enjoyed it, and it gave me even more ideas to consider. Then we go into the last part of the book, part 5, reflecting on the crooked path. Chapter 13, establishing your own traditional witchcraft practice. And then as a conclusion, the witch's farewell, a glossary and a bibliography. And then of course the list of all the 47 exercises is after that as well. So what do I think about this book? I think it's wonderful. It's absolutely a 10 out of 10 from me. I absolutely adored this book. It was really insightful. The writer was fantastic. I enjoyed his writing style so much, and the information in the book was wonderful. Really, truly wonderful, guys. And I've been at this a long time, 29 years. It's not very often that I say that I've read a book from cover to cover and I absolutely adored it. Usually I read a book and I'll enjoy it and add it to my collection because I have enjoyed it and it does have value, but there'll be things in it that I didn't like or disagreed with, or know that that information has come from somewhere else and the author's maybe lying a little bit. And while it might irritate me, the book's still good. This book didn't do any of that. This book was honest and upfront, really unusual, talked about things that aren't very well talked about, gave it to you in a really straightforward way and was honest about it, and I absolutely loved that, so 10 out of 10. Would I recommend it to a beginner? Absolutely. There are chapters in this book about how to create your spells, the ingredients and items you will need, and he gives you all the foundations for traditional magic. So definitely recommend for a beginner, intermediate and an advanced practitioner. All of you are going to learn from this. I mean, after 29 years I did learn things from this book. I really enjoyed it and I definitely would refer to it. I've recommended it to all my students, and I know that this book is recommended a lot on the internet, but it's not bullshit, guys. It is generally a really good book. You will not be disappointed. So that completes my review of The Crooked Path. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give me a thumbs up, click the bell so YouTube will tell you when my next video comes out. If you'd like to offer like, love and support to this channel, you can do that through Patreon or my Amazon wishlist, and both links are provided. If you'd like to book any of my magical services or contact me for any reason, you can do that via my email, Facebook, Twitter or Instagram, and all the links are provided, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. I will provide links on where you can buy this book, and I'll let you know if it's available as audio as well. And I will speak to you all very soon. Blessed be.